people from the industry that are part of this committee. And what I think we ought to do first is kind of go around the room and introduce who you are and what the organization you represent, and that way we'll kind of know who everyone is. I'm Josh Harkins. I'm in the State Senate and Chair of the Finance Committee. Yep. Push that button on the bottom. The green light will come on. There's a button at the bottom. There you go.
I'm Donnie Bell in the House of Representatives, and I chair the Workforce Development Committee.
Chad McMahon, I serve in the State Senate from Lee County, the 6th District, and I chair local and private.
Chris Johnson, I'm in the Senate.
Lee Nations, I'm president of Associated Builders and Contractors of Mississippi.
Bob Wilson, I'm executive director of Associated General Contractors of Mississippi.
Trey Copeland, I was asked by the governor to be here.
I'm Tim Allred with Heritage Building Corporation from Meridian, Mississippi, and I'm president of the Home Builders Association of Mississippi.
Trey Lamar, chairman of Ways and Means Committee in the House.
Okay. First, I thought it would be good to let Department of Revenue kind of get up and talk about construction tax. Obviously some people may or may not understand the way the tax system is set up for construction-related activities, and let them kind of do a little overview and then talk about some of the numbers that construction tax generates here in Mississippi, and let DOR kind of give us some oversight or some ideas from their perspective on it. First, do you have any comments there?
I don't. I think we are here today. Appreciate everybody coming. We're here today to learn a little bit about the issues. I know I am. I know other members of the committee are as well. So I look forward to the presentation by DOR. We want to learn what some of the concerns are, because I understand there are some concerns out there, and just see how we as a legislature can craft public policy that can move the state forward in this area. If there's a better way to do it, certainly I think we owe that to the taxpayers to figure that out and address those issues. So we're here to learn, and look forward to it.
Thank you. Commissioner Graham, you and Meg want to lead us off up there? Excuse me, Meg.
Good afternoon. For those of you all who don't know me, I'm Meg Bartlett. I'm with the Department of Revenue.
Meg, if you don't mind, try to speak into the microphone. So I think
sorry.
some people, it's hard to hear. Senator Bryan's correct. It's that microphone, I think, that's...
Okay. I'm Meg Bartlett with the Department of Revenue. And just a very 30,000-foot level high kind of overview of how we tax construction activities in Mississippi. Most of you all know we have two different paths for taxation of construction activities. There is a path for commercial construction that taxes the total receipts of the job on commercial construction activities that are over $10,000. That's been in existence for a long time, certainly the entire time I've been with the department. Early in the 1980s, it's at 3.5%. I'm sorry, 3.5% tax on the contractor for the taxation on commercial construction activities when the job is in excess of $10,000. That went from 2.5% to 3.5% in the early 1980s and has remained the same since then. And that tax is on the prime contractor. The prime contractor applies for what we call a material purchase certificate, an MPC, through the Department of Revenue, and we issue that MPC. It's job specific. They use that MPC to purchase component building materials and any taxable services exempt from the regular retail sales tax of 7%, and then they just pay to us 3.5% on the total receipts of the job. They give that number to their subcontractors, who may also use that number to purchase materials, but it's due just from the prime contractor. On residential construction, we do that differently. Residential construction is just taxed at the rate of 7% on component materials, the building materials that are used in residential construction, and if there are any taxable services in that residential construction job, and those would be things like plumbers, heating and air conditioning vendors, electricians, installation contractors, those types of activities that are what we call taxable services are taxed at 7% on their gross income. Otherwise, it's just 7% on building materials. There is the possibility that those building materials may also be subject to tax on installation charges as well. And those would be things like if you just do maybe sale and installation of windows, roofing materials, countertops, flooring, those types of items of tangible personal property are also taxed on installation charges if you have a seller who is selling and installing the property.
Selling and installing meaning supplying the material and the labor.
And the labor to install the property, correct. So those are the two kind of paths for taxation of construction activities in Mississippi. Just as kind of for information, we talked about this yesterday, the 3.5% contractor's tax for FY20, fiscal year 20, brought in right at $5 million, $4.8 million in fiscal year 20. I see it.
Yeah. Is that for the entire state?
Hold on just one moment.
Okay.
I'm just realizing.
While you're doing that, I want to explain something to some of our members. So on a commercial tax, the 3.5% is on the total job. It's on the profit, the overhead, everything. So if you're going to
Everything.
charge somebody $100,000 to do a job, you're paying 3.5% on the $100,000, not just the materials and labor that are used to go into the job. So you're taxed 3.5% on your profit, overhead, and everything. It's on the entire amount. Residential, if you're building a house for somebody, you pay 7% sales tax on your lumber, 7% if you're plumber, HVAC, whoever comes and works on your job, you pay the sales tax rate on it, but you don't pay sales tax on the sales price of the house to the customer. And there's others, she talked about individual contractors that may be like tile or HVAC or plumbing, where they're supplying the material and the labor. They charge you sales tax. So if I'm an individual contractor doing one of those trades and I do a job for you, I charge you 7% on my total job. My 7% on my material and labor is charged to you. If it was a commercial job I was doing for you, you would give me that MPC and I wouldn't charge you sales tax on the job. I just charge you my material and labor, and that's it. And all those figures are added up, and whenever you submit for your MPC, as you get paid on it, you submit the 3.5% to the Department of Revenue. I think if it's over $75,000, you have to prepay your sales tax. So if it's over at $75,000 and you got a $200,000 job, you prepay your 3.5% to the state. A bond, yeah, or you can have a bond.
I'm sorry, I could go into that further. Yeah, for commercial construction jobs, if they are under $75,000, you just pay on them as you make the receipts from the job. If they are over $75,000, or you are a prime contractor that does not have a permanent place of business in Mississippi, you're required to either prepay the tax or bond the job. We can do blanket bonds, which essentially you may have a blanket bond for $1 million that covers you no matter how many jobs you have. It covers you up to the tax amount of $1 million. Or you can do a job bond, which is specific for that job. So on contractor's tax, that we do require those. Most of those are bonded.
Okay. I wanted some of the committee members that don't do construction to understand what the 3.5%, I don't want you to think it's just on the material and labor, it's on the whole job versus the residential 7%. So, all right, Meg.
Okay, let me correct that. I was giving you the wrong number on the contractor's tax. I knew when I said it, it sounded wrong, but I was reading a number that was actually the gross receipts number, but the tax is actually $167 million on contractor's tax. I knew when I said that it didn't sound right.
That, for what period?
For fiscal year 20, that's the total that we were collected for fiscal year 20, is $167 million.
That's commercial, that's the
That's
3.5%.
commercial. It's hard to break down specifics on residential construction because you have a lot of different types of businesses that are involved in residential construction. But in the group of NAICS codes, North American Industry Code classification systems, that we use that would be primarily for residential construction, that number is roughly $80 million. And then if you look at building materials, which that's going to be, you know, most of it's going to probably be contractors purchasing building materials, but a lot of it's going to be just me going into a building, you know, for my personal use. But, so it's hard, we can't break that down, but building materials, lumber, hardware materials, building material supply dealers, that number is $190 million. And that's a 7% tax.
What was the 80 million on?
That's going to be on like plumbers, electricians, building finishing contractors, other specialty trade contractors. So it's primarily residential because of the fact that it's this is the rate code for 7%. So that would indicate that it's going to be residential or commercial that's less than $10,000.
Okay, the caveat I was going to say, or if it's a commercial job that's under 10,000, you just
Correct.
pay the 7%.
That's
Okay.
correct. Commercial construction jobs that are less than $10,000 are taxed the same as residential construction. It's just because that threshold of 10,000 hasn't been raised since it was put into place, you really can't do much in the way of a commercial job for less than $10,000. We don't have a lot of that activity. Most of that's going to be subject to contractor's tax.
But let's talk about that for just a minute. So is the 10,000 cap, both the 10,000 and the $75,000 caps, are those statutory?
Yes, they are.
And do you know when they were last visited?
Haven't been changed in 30 years, I can tell you that. I don't know when they were last changed, but it's been over 30 years.
Well, that's a problem.
Yes.
I think clearly that's an issue.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And just for clarification too, when we talk about commercial construction, that's everything from building construction to road construction to, it can cover landscaping type activities that are done. It includes plumbing jobs that are over $10,000, electrical jobs that are just electrical jobs that are over $10,000. So it includes basically anything that's done to commercial, non-residential properties are taxed under the contractor's tax.
Meg, how do we police that? Y'all?
Well, I will tell you that the Contractors Board does require you to provide your MPC number in order to get your permit for the job, so that there is some type of matching there. There is a diversion off of some of the contractor's tax that has to do with some highway construction that goes to the Department of Transportation. And so when they let those jobs, they provide us information for those contracts so that we can track those. There are some cities and counties that will require you to provide an MPC number if you're going to get a permit there for some work. So it's kind of a checks and balance that way. And then it's not a lot, but we do actually find non-qualified is the word we use when somebody doesn't have their MPC. It's an unqualified job. We do find a lot of unqualified jobs simply because we have revenue officers and auditors who are out around the state and riding around, and it's not uncommon for them to see somebody doing a job and they'll stop and ask for their MPC, especially if they see out-of-state tags on vehicles or out-of-state contractor trucks. So we do stop and ask people at job sites when we see them out and around. We get some industry information, things like Dodge reports and things where we can get information on large projects that are let. So we do a good bit of research trying to find those that are happening around
It
the
seems
state.
to me that the best way to police that would be at the closest point to the boots on the ground. So in other words, if a county or city is doing their job, they've got to get a permit for you to build a house or add on to a house or for you build a commercial building. Do you know if the current law requires the cities and counties to, before letting that permit of someone to produce an NPC, if it's going to be a commercial job, or do we do that?
I don't think there's a statutory requirement for it. It's just a practice that some of them do, and we go to, and part of, one of the things we do for audit research, we go to cities and counties and we get the listing of permits that have been issued so that we can go back and check those jobs to see if they've been qualified.
It seems like there's a lot of chasing our tail there when it could be, we could know on the very front end, what's going on.
Certainly.
Okay. One of the problems that I have personally experienced, in full disclosure, is whether you are a residential home builder or when the hailstorm came through here and destroyed 3 counties, everybody was roofing, everybody was doing, odd and end work. The discrepancy or the vagueness, I think, in the application of the tax code as to whether you're a remodeler or whether you are doing one trade that requires material and labor and requires you to pay sales tax on it. And correct me if I'm wrong. So if I roof your house and I also fix some sheetrock and paint inside and maybe there was some damage to the floor because of a leak, that's a remodeler. I don't charge sales tax on that. But if I just replace your roof and supply the material and the labor, I charge sales tax.
Kind of. We issued a technical bulletin in 2017 to try to address some of that. And we, in general, you're right, is that if I'm simply just the roofer and I'm selling you the shingles and installing the shingles, I'm charging you 7% on everything. But if it's a part of that, I may have to replace some soffit or some rotten boards or do some other type, some sheetrock. If over 50% of that job is from roofing, then we're going to tax the entire job, because that's the primary purpose of that job. Was you were hired to replace a roof, and there's some incidental work that has to be done with that. The bigger problem is when I have somebody come in and they're just remodeling my house. And in the remodel of my house, they are installing new floors, they are maybe adding a wall, maybe possibly repairing some plumbing or moving a bathroom and those kind of things. And so that's where it can kind of get dicey on some of that. And generally, if it's a true remodel where I've hired you to do, there's a multitude of things that you're doing, and the primary job of that is to remodel my home or add a room or that kind of thing, then we're just going to say that's like residential construction, like stick-built construction for a new home, and we're going to tax it at 7% of the materials and any taxable services that you hire to put into that job. But if I was hired to remodel the bathroom or to build, maybe a good one, I've been hired to build new cabinets in your bathroom. If I build them on site, it's a construction activity. I'm only paying tax on the materials. If I build the cabinets in my shop or buy pre-made cabinets and come and install them, then you have a situation which is an installed sale dealing with tax on the materials and labor.
See, that's where, so I can be a trim contractor and I can provide material and labor, but I don't charge sales tax if I'm building your cabinets on site.
On site, correct. But if you have a cabinet
Difference in me
guy,
buying material and labor and building it off-site and trailering them over and hanging them.
because there is a section of the sales tax law that defines what an installation is. And it talks about taking tangible personal property, a cabinet, and installing it into that property regardless of whether or not it becomes a permanent fixture to that realty. So if I'm taking a piece of otherwise tangible personal property, a cabinet, and I'm bringing you a whole cabinet, whether I made it in my shop or bought it at Lowe's or whatever, and I'm installing it in your home, that's sale and installation of tangible personal property. If I build it on site, I'm doing a construction activity.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. One of the, do you have any other?
I've got
Data, you got a
one
question?
quick, yeah, could you run through a list of what the taxable services are, so we'll have a idea?
Heating and air conditioning,
Okay,
electrical work, electricians, plumbers, insulation contractors,
What is that?
installing insulation.
Insulation, okay.
Landscaping,
Painting?
dirt work, grading, ditching, excavating, and landscaping. Those are going to be the primary taxable services that are involved in construction activities.
What about painters?
Painters are not considered a taxable service.
Why?
The law doesn't list them.
I know that's what you're going to say, but like, is there any rhyme or reason to any of this stuff? Going back through legislative history, I mean, so who had the best lobbyist at the time? I mean, that's my comment, obviously, but help this make sense to me.
What I would say is heating and air, electrical, plumbing, grading, ditching, and excavating are services that are, while they are very common in the construction world, it's also very common that I'll call somebody out to just repair my air conditioner. Or I have a plumbing problem and I've called somebody out to unstop my drain. You know, so those are services that, while they are very common in the construction-related world, I, as a homeowner or anybody, will have the need for a heating and air guy, a good electrician, a good plumber. Those are just services that we're going to all be using in the day-to-day part of our life outside of a construction activity. Yes, I can hire somebody to paint my house, but that's primarily considered to be a construction-related activity, just like drywall, painters, framers. Those are all considered to be primary construction-related jobs, and they are not taxed on their gross income. It's only those services that are, I believe, generally going to be used can be used outside of a construction-related activity. And it covers much more than just that. It also covers like repair of tangible personal property. It covers automobile repairing. It covers, I'm trying to remember, like mattress renovating was one of the taxable services that was listed. So there's a whole list in section 276523 of the sales tax law.
Give me that code section one more time.
7-65-23.
Thank you. Hey, 23. Can you help me, kind of along those lines, do you have anything to offer as to why we distinguish, you know, what is the policy reasons, if you know, why do we distinguish the two different tax structures for commercial versus residential? Why was that done?
I really don't know the answer to that. At one point in time, we actually did tax residential construction in the same manner that we taxed commercial construction. At one point in time, they got MPCs, or it was taxed in a similar fashion. Excuse me. But I don't know why we have two divergent paths on that. We are, the only other state that I'm aware of that has anything similar to our contractor's tax is New Mexico, I believe it is. So we are very unusual with our contractor's tax. It's a very unique bird when it comes to taxation in general and compared to other states. And I don't know why we have divergent paths on them. I will say my guess is that the volume at one point in time dealing with residential construction, trying to keep all of those trades registered and under and reporting on a monthly basis probably was problematic. And so, no offense to anybody, but our commercial guys seem to be where it was at, I guess, you know, trying to have that taxation point at that level. And that's only a guess that I could give you. I don't really know why it was changed. It's been that way for the entire time I've been with the department, and I really don't have any legislative history as to why that was changed.
Do you know, and again, no, I'm not going to hold you to specifics, but do you know roughly what our surrounding states, how our surrounding states treat contractors? And there may be some industry folks here who could comment on that as well, but, you know, Tennessee, Alabama.
I think the prevalent way of taxing it is tax on materials. That is probably the most common taxation would be tax on materials that I'm aware of. Greg, do you know of anything any different than that? it's certainly, state taxing regimes are certainly moving towards more taxation of services because our economy has moved to a more service-based economy. But traditionally, when sales taxes were implemented, it was a tax on goods. And so that's the where sales taxes was born, out of a taxation of goods. And so it was not very common and prevalent in states to be taxing anything other than the sale of tangible personal property. So Mississippi was actually, I think, kind of on the leading edge in some ways in taxing some service-related businesses, not just the sale of goods. So how they came to what ones were taxable, I don't know, but I think it's probably more common to tax just materials, and there probably are states that do tax things like plumbers and heating and air conditioning guys and that kind of stuff on a gross income basis like we do, but it's most common probably to tax just materials.
So our commercial, the 3.5 commercial tax is what you're saying is the kind of our, as you call it, a strange bird. That's what you're referring to?
It's a strange bird, that's the word I use, but I will say this, and I'm hopeful that the industry people here would agree with me. I think it works, and it works relatively well. The contractor's tax is, in my opinion, an easier managed taxation scheme because it is, I tax the prime contractor, it's 3.5%, the total receipts of the job. There are some quirks to it, but in general, it's a relatively easy taxation scheme.
Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. McMahon?
Well, that's the other thing that I will point out, that your contractor's tax allows you to tax jobs for exempt entities. So federal jobs, federal highway jobs, state jobs. The contractor's tax, because it's levied on the contractor, does not have an exemption like you would find in just regular retail sales tax, where if I sell goods to the federal government or the state of Mississippi, it's exempt. But because the tax on building a new school is taxed at the contractor's level, we get the tax off of it.
So same for city government, county government?
There is no exemption to contractor's tax. Yes. Yes. Yes, and yeah, there is no exemption from the contractor's tax. Well, relatively no exemption, but
Never say never, huh?
yeah.
Senator McMahon?
Chairman Harkins and Chairman Lamar, thank y'all for your efforts in putting this meeting together. Commissioner Bartlett, I wanted to, before I make any other comments or questions, I wanted to thank you. You are a very hardworking bureaucrat, and I mean that as in term of endearment. Every time I've ever called you on behalf of a constituent and asked you to help me, you've been very responsive and have given an answer within 24 hours to my constituents or to myself or my office. And I want you to know that does not go unnoticed.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for being very responsive and a public servant. And I say that in a bureaucrat, I don't mean that in a dirty word. I mean that as a term of endearment. Thank you. Very responsive.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, would you agree that it seems like this tax code for contractors is very convoluted? And I mean, you're not even clear about all. I mean, some of it you said, well, sometimes and somewhat. Would you agree with that it's convoluted?
It is. I would agree. It is not clear cut. Yes.
Yeah, it's not a fair, flat tax. And the reason I say that is my father owned a cabinet business for 30 years, and I know a lot of people in the construction industry. I also was in the construction industry at one time, and you know, it's not the large companies that are suffering. It's the smaller companies that have 1 to 10 to 15 employees. They have an accountant, and they're trying to pay by the rules. And you stop me or correct me, but most people in Mississippi are honest, hardworking people, and they're doing everything they can to abide by the tax codes and make a living. You would agree with that?
I would agree with that. Yes.
But, you know, it's easy to sit in this room and talk about this, but it's a very scary thing for an everyday taxpayer, an everyday Mississippian, to receive a call from the Department of Revenue to let them know that they're under audit because y'all are going back 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and that they owe taxes on jobs that have long been closed. And sometimes these men or women-owned businesses may owe $25, $50, $100,000 or more. And they call me and they are completely distraught. They don't know how in the world they're going to pay it, because for many of them it's an entire year's profits, to pay their tax burden. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Your office and the Department of Revenue is committed to working with this legislative task force and this business industry task force to find a way to make this fair and flat, so that there's not there's a lot of arguments a lot of times between Department of Revenue and the contractor, and their own accounting services don't agree, what was taxable. And it's a scary thing for people to have these audits, because a lot of times people don't understand how government works, and all they think, oh my goodness, I owe all this money. So you would agree that we need to find a way to make this fair and flat.
I have no problems with that, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions on the?
Mr. Chairman, there are some people in this room that could give testimony to exactly what I'm talking about if you were to open it up.
I'm going to recognize someone in just a second.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
To address, I just want to see if anybody had questions of Commissioner or Meg before we move on to the next presenter. Everybody's good? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Commissioner. All right. Ms. Sally Deer with Watkins Construction is going to come up and give us a little personal testimony, I guess, and maybe some things to think about. Sally, if you wouldn't mind, make sure you speak into that microphone. That way we'll be able to hear you, and then the people streaming online will be able to hear. There you go.
Well, first I wanted to thank you, Chairman, and thank y'all for allowing me to be here. My name is Sally Deer. My husband and I own Watkins Construction and Roofing. If you came down High Street, you had to pass it to get here. He's been in the roofing and construction industry for about 20 years. I function as the CFO. I came over about 2 years ago. I'm a CPA by trade, and came over to begin working with him in the construction industry and the roofing industry. And we've feel very blessed to get to talk to you and to share some real life experiences. We employ about 33 Mississippians who we consider to be family, and we primarily do, just to tell you about us and where I'm coming from, residential storm-related damage. That's our primary bread and butter. We have a commercial division as well, but primarily we just do residential. The things that y'all discussed earlier are some of the things that are near and dear to my heart, and I brought handouts too. If y'all want one, I can pass those around. And I also brought a copy of the technical bulletin, because I pull up that bulletin all the time that the Department of Revenue has released. But basically, we feel that in a lot of situations that we are at a competitive disadvantage when it comes to roofing situations, insurance-related damage work. I have a handful of bids in here that we have gotten where we've gone to a job and submitted our bid to do re-roofing activities, to do sheetrock paint, all things that go with a storm-related event. By the law that we're interpreting, we apply the 7% sales tax due to the fact that roofing is considered installation sales, and then our competitors don't. But I guess the two main problems we see, that from a licensure standpoint, we want everybody to have to be licensed. Obviously not if you're doing work to your own property, or if your church is, doing work to a house, that would be an exemption, but we want everybody to be licensed. And right now with the Board of Contractors, if you apply for a commercial license, you have to provide your sales tax ID, and for residential you don't. So to me, that would just be an easy fix. If you're required to present a sales tax ID number when you apply for a contractor's license, that would give the department a better list from which to audit. And I say audit a lot. I used to work for the Department of Audit, so I've been on both sides of this, and I know how hard it is for them to to come up with a complete pool, because we used to be right there in the same boat. But anyway, I would love for a sales tax ID to be required for residential construction. And in regards to the flat tax that Senator McMahon mentioned earlier, that it's functioned so well for commercial. If I go do a commercial job, regardless of what it is, I apply for an MPC number, don't pay taxes on my materials, and then charge 3.5% tax, whether, like Ms. Bartlett said, whether it's a church, whether it's a school, whether it's whatever, because that's my tax. It's the 3.5%. But when I go roof a home, let's say somebody calls me and said, you know, Sally, a tree hit my house. You know, I've got this insurance company, they've given me this statement of loss, I want you to come take care of it. And on that statement of loss, there may be roofing, there may be paint, there may be sheetrock, all that. That, in our experience, it's been that we have to charge 7% sales tax for that, even though there's multiple trades. And it's just very unclear, at this point, when you're looking at these remodeling jobs, what parts are taxable, what parts are not taxable, and if the job itself is taxable. So we really believe that a flat 3.5% for residential, like commercial, would solve this problem. And I don't have clear, hard numbers for this, but I gather to say that if all people conducting business, especially in our industry, in the roofing industry, had to be licensed and had to have a sales tax ID, even at 3%, I really believe the revenue will go up rather than down, with the difference from 7 to 3.5. And again, like Senator Harkins had mentioned earlier with the cabinets, the same is true for roofing. If I come to your house and say, here's your roofing material list, go buy it, and then I'll come do all the labor, I don't have to pay or charge sales tax on my labor. But if and that's perfectly fine. That's a legal way of doing it. But if I were to come and the way we do business is I come in and we provide everything. We order our materials from our supplier. They're delivered straight from the supplier to your home. We come in, do the work. I have to then charge the consumer tax on everything, both the materials and the labor. So it's just, I just think that, and I really appreciate the time and effort that you are all putting into this, because I think that is going to be good for our industry, industry of other contractors and consumers too, because it's confusing to homeowners when they see my invoice with tax and when they see all these others without.
Thank you, Sally. You know, one of the things that I think we don't really think about, and given this year with the number of storms that we've had come through the Gulf, we've been fortunate they haven't run right up the Mississippi coast inland, is, you know, we need to have a vibrant community of contractors that do this type of storm damage work. And I think several things to think about. One is Mississippi, we need to make sure that, and it happens, when we had the hailstorm here 6 years ago, when Clinton all the way through Pearl, Brandon, and Jackson were damaged with hail, you had companies from Oklahoma, you know, all over the place, Texas, Ohio, Pennsylvania, flooded down here. They did work and they left. And there's no trail that they can, you know, go after to these people that are coming down here. And so when you have a business like Sally's that goes up to a person and says, look, we'll supply the material and the labor, and, you know, we have to charge 7% sales tax on that job, whereas you have a company coming from out of town that has no intention of paying you know, remitting sales tax to the state. They're just getting a job and getting a check and moving on to the next one. There's an inherent disadvantage to our local businesses that are doing it right, or any business that's doing it right, that's charging sales tax, and there are companies that are not charging sales tax. And then if she wants to be competitive, she can say, okay, well, homeowner, here's the you know, the job quote. It's going to take 70 squares. You need to go buy your own material, and I'll come and install it. But well, who's going to have the warranty on the material? Well, you are, because you bought the material. I'm just doing the labor. Well, no, I don't want to use you. I want somebody that's going to do material and labor. I mean, there's a lot of dilemmas that a homeowner deals with and a business deals with when you have a situation like what's happening specifically with this type of construction-related activity. And there are probably others, but you have people that are coming into the state of Mississippi that are not registered, that are basically causing an inherent disadvantage for our local businesses. Now, I went to Louisiana and did work over there. In order to get a permit, and this is just a permit in a little city to do a roof, you had to have a tax ID number from the Department of Revenue in Louisiana. Well, okay, in order to get that, you had to be registered with the Secretary of State to get a tax ID number from the Department of Revenue. That way, every construction job over there is tied to a number, a tax number, which helps their Department of Revenue to audit and make sure people are doing what they're supposed to. Now, obviously, when they sign up with the Department of Revenue, they subject themselves to the laws of the state of Mississippi, which helps give them teeth. But it also, it helps to level the playing field, so to speak, on how we're treating out-of-state contractors versus our in-state contractors, and where everybody's operating on the same playing field. So I think that's one of the things that I hope that, and I had mentioned to the commissioner and Meg, is how can we work with our cities and counties? Because you don't have to, first of all, if you have to have a permit, if I'm gonna build a house, I have to put my contracting, my license permit for construction on my application. Well, to go do a roof, you don't have to be a licensed contractor to do a roof. In some areas of our state, you don't have to have a contractor's license. You just have to go up there and you may have to have, sometimes they make you, I'm trying to think of who it was, you had to provide proof of insurance, I think general liability or bond, but you didn't have to have a contractor's license, so therefore, the same thing I was talking about earlier. They just come up there, they apply, they get the permit, they go do the job. But in order to get a permit, if we tie something to where you have to produce a Mississippi tax ID number, so we'll know how many jobs this company is doing in the state, and whether or not, if they're from out of state, I mean, in Louisiana, you couldn't have a post office box as your business address. You know, they'll come in town, they'll get a burner phone with a 601 number, they'll get a post office box in Brandon. The best story ever was I went to bid a job, and a guy drove up, and I knew, because I heard him talking about having to drive back to Oklahoma at the supply store that morning, and he pulls up on the same job that I'm bidding, and he is telling the lady, he's like, yes, ma'am, I'm from here. I live here. My number's, 601 number. And I looked at him, I said, tell me what the mascot at Brandon High School is. And he just looked at me blank and turned around and walked off because he knew he was had. But I'm telling you, this is a serious issue within this industry. I know because I've experienced it, I've lived it. But if there's a way, if one thing we can do is find a way to get a level playing field for contractors where they're not getting beat out on the front end before the job even starts, I think will be advantageous for them, and it will help protect Mississippi homeowners that are contracting with these people, these out-of-state folks, a little bit.
I've got to just kind of follow up to that. Sally, I appreciate you coming. Would you comment, what I'm hearing from some of this testimony and just the comments is this is as much of a licensing and permitting issue as it is a tax policy issue.
Absolutely. You're exactly right. It's got two sides to it. We recently opened an office in Fairhope, Alabama after Hurricane Sally. And to do that, we had to first get a physical location there. We're on State Highway 181. We have a building. We had to register with Secretary of State, register with the Department of Revenue, and then register with each individual city just to obtain a business license to be able to get permits. I called the Department of Revenue in Alabama and I said, okay, Mississippi is a little confusing, so I want to get it right here as well. Tell me how to pay sales tax. And they said, you pay when you buy your materials. You do not pay when you pay nothing on your labor. Your homeowner's not taxed. So we pay sales tax when we buy those materials, but not there. So it's a problem there. But yes, I mean, like Senator Harkins said, it's a problem when these out-of-state contractors come in and they don't have a license, they don't pay any sales tax, and then they're gone tomorrow.
Again, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but what is required? What do our laws require by way of licensing in the contracting world? Obviously, commercial jobs, you have to have a contractor's license. My understanding is that for you to build a house, you have to have a residential contractor's license. But I also understand there may be some loopholes there.
Well, and I don't know the full extent of the law for all industries, but I will speak to roofing. Some cities and communities require us to get permits. And for those permits, you usually either have to present a Board of Contractors license or a bond and a driver's license. It varies by county, or by city rather. Then to get that residential license, you have to be registered with the Secretary of State. You have to furnish either a federal or state income tax number, but you do not have to provide a sales tax number. So they don't have to register that in that regards at all.
Okay. Yeah.
Any questions from the committee? Senator McMahon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to follow up on her conversation. The district I represent, District 6, we've had 3 tornadoes in the last 5 years. And I don't want to miss this opportunity for you to present expert testimony in these matters, but a lot of time these out-of-state contractors are showing up and they're bidding a job. It's not just the taxes. It's also the homeowners are not receiving a fair product for what they're paying for in many cases. A lot of times the out-of-state contractors are leaving components off, such as valley metal, or they're leaving off the ice barrier, or they're putting on second shingles. They're not even providing first quality shingles, which voids the warranty ultimately with the insurance company. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah. So last year we were able to get some legislation out of the state Senate to address some of these concerns, because it's the homeowners ultimately that are finding out 6, 8, 12 months later when their roofs begin to leak. They find out that not all the components have been properly placed on the roof, and they can't get in touch with those contractors because they were using a burner phone. And many times the insurance companies will not warranty any of the work, any of the damages caused by the roof missing the components. Is that correct?
In my experience, yes, that's correct. It's to the point that my 8-year-old can see going down the road, Mama, they're not taking the felt all the way to the deck because we look at it so much. There are, and again, I hate to speak about Alabama again, but they put a system up called a fortified roofing system, and every job we've done down there, an inspector has come to the job to make sure that we are tearing down to the deck, re-nailing the deck, putting starter strip, peel and stick,
Correct.
all taping the seams, all the things that they require. And here, it breaks my heart to hear sweet little old ladies call in and say, I had my roof replaced back in 2013 after the hailstorm, and I tried to call my contractor because I've had so many leaks, and I can't get him. So then they call us, and to stay in business, we have to charge them to go out there and make that repair, and it really is hard.
And for those that may not understand on this committee, shingles, not all shingles are first quality. You can actually purchase second grade shingles from a manufacturer or distributor and put that on. The homeowner has no idea that it doesn't have the right copper content, or it doesn't have the right all the different components that go into making that shingle, copper being a very important component within that. So, as I stated, last year we were able to get some legislation out to try to address some of this, because ultimately I'm concerned about the residents of Mississippi receiving the product that can be under warranty, that they're not going to be out of pocket later. Thank you for your testimony today. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you would like to add? Maybe I didn't ask.
I just wanted to add to your comment, as confusing as it may be to contractors trying to do the right thing, you're right. This is even more confusing to the people of Mississippi. Most of the time when you're faced with a storm-related incident, it's the first time you've ever had to think about putting a roof on your house. So thinking about the quality, the underlayment, the taxes, it's just too much. You need quality contractors.
And sometimes, like I said, I've been in this business for 5 years myself. Many times you can lose a job over 7%. You take a $10,000 job and you're charging tax on the job and someone else is not, you'll lose the job.
We lost all of these.
And Mississippi lost their revenue just because we don't require people to have some type of proper licensing and bonding, or at least identify themselves before they do business in these areas. So thank you so much, Ms. Deere, for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
Are there any questions from?
I've got a comment. Is there anybody here from the Board of Contractors? Maybe, maybe not. I didn't notice anybody. Okay. Could you comment at all, and you may not be able to, but what the law is as far as who has to have a license in order to build and who does not?
The law is that unless you're building for yourself.
Hit that green button right there.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
unless you're building for yourself, there are some exemptions if you're building your own home or building something for yourself, but other than that, you're supposed to be licensed. The problem is not licensure. Most reputable contractors are licensed, but there are a lot of, most counties, I would say, in Mississippi don't monitor licensure, which means that you can go out and build in the county, and if there's nobody out there inspecting it or making you get a permit, then you can do whatever you want. And that's where the big problem is requiring the counties to have a permitting system and an inspection division that goes out there. There's state building codes, but nobody's enforcing those codes. You can go out into most counties and build whatever the hell you want to and charge the homeowner, for that work, and it may not be up to code. And then they have a problem, and then they're going to call a reputable contractor to come out and fix it, but they're going to pay double for work that should have been done right the first time.
What has been the pushback in the past? Is just more government interference, that kind of thought, or what?
Some of that, but I think the counties don't want to spend the money for
Expense.
permitting. The expense is, I think, the biggest thing, and I'm from Lauderdale County, and over there, that's what I get over and over. We don't have the money, but yet they need to have permitting, and they need to have inspections. And if they did, then they would ask for a license. They'd pull up on a job site, and they would, hey, where's your permit? It's not displayed, and there's no permit, and then they can shut the job down.
What about, what you might consider subs, whether they HVAC, electricians, plumbing? Are all those folks required by law currently to be licensed? Supposed to be.
They are, but I can't speak to those trades specifically, but they should be.
I wish we had somebody from the Board of Contractors here, because that's a real issue. To me, if you had, every time a permit is pulled at the city or county level, you had the person making sure that entity was licensed, that they had a sales tax ID, that they were, registered to do business here in the state. From that point in time, there's boots on the ground from the very,
From the very beginning. I know in
cradle to
Meridian,
grave of the project.
the city of Meridian has an
follow it.
inspection division, so there are plumbers and HVAC people that work in the city and the county, but there's some that will only work in the county because they're not licensed.
I'm aware of situations where there's some of these people very reputable in their communities hold themselves out to be, residential building contractors. And they've never once obtained a license, a contractor's license. All they do, and they get paid to build houses all day long, been doing it for years and years and years. They just go make the homeowner pull the permit. And then at that point in time, the permit homeowner just turns it over to the contractor, to what you would think is a contractor. And that happens a lot across the state. Please. You got to give it a good push.
I'm loud, so I'll do it that way.
You got to do it for the streaming.
There you go.
There you go.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Trey Copeland. I'm an attorney. I represent builders and contractors and design engineers and owners and everybody on the job. I've been doing it for 20-some-odd years. And licensure has been an issue for us, and I think we've actually brought some measures before the legislature. I represent commercial and residential trade associations. The issue is, and it's been, on the residential side, if I'm a general contractor, I have to have a license if I'm building over $50,000, okay? If I'm on the residential side and I don't have a direct contract with the owner, I don't have to have a license. We tried to bring some legislature before the legislature a couple of years ago to put life safety, require life safety subs to have licensure. That did not pass. It died in the House, I believe. But on the residential side, if I don't have a direct contract with the owner, I don't have to have a licensure. I don't have to have a license.
That would be on like a spec house.
Spec house, custom house, anything of that, any, really any construction.
Wouldn't you have a contract on a custom house?
Sure, sure.
Yeah, with spec house, you would own it yourself or have a contract with the owner, right?
If a spec house, I'd be building it technically for myself for the sale to the general public. And so if I am doing that, if I build more than 2 in a year, I have to have a license. Okay? It's presumed if I build a house for myself that I don't need to be licensed. And the statute actually allows me to build 2 for myself in a year, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but okay, that's what the way the statute reads. The statute also allows construction managers to go unlicensed. And so one area
What I was just talking about.
where there's a lot, I'm not going to call it fraud, but where there's a lot of getting around the licensure statute is I'm going to call myself construction manager. I'm going to go to Mr. Allred here and I'm going to say, look, I'll build your house. You pulled the permit. You're going to contract with all the subs, but oh, by the way, it's going to be my sub list. And I'll just tell you who you're going to contract with. And I walk like a duck. I talk like a duck. I'm really a duck, but I'm going to call myself a construction manager, and that's how I get away with not being licensed. And licensure comes with it financial responsibility, okay? Insurance, specifically, workers' comp. When he pulls the building permit by himself, he's now the builder. And under the statute, the New Home Warranty Act, if he's the builder and he's also the owner, he owes a subsequent purchaser a warranty on that structure, and he has no clue of that. So he sells his house 3 years later, there's a foundation problem. He pulled the permit, he is the contractor, he owes the warranty, even though he's not insured for that, and he has no idea because he hired a construction manager to do that.
Trey, I think you just put a little more detail on the problem I was just highlighting.
So another issue, Mr. Chairman, we go back to taxation. We're here really talking about taxation. And so the question is on the residential, how do you keep up with those projects? Well, permitting, I mean, that makes the most sense. But in Lamar County, which is a fast-growing suburban county in the state, there is no building permits. There is no building codes. There's no inspectors. When I have a defect case involving a house for a builder down there, there's no permitting file for me to pull. It doesn't exist.
Trey, do you do any work outside of the state, or are you mainly in Mississippi?
I'm licensed in Alabama, and I do practice in Alabama.
I guess my reason for asking that question is, do you know whether or not our surrounding states have some of these similar issues, or is this something that's just Mississippi is behind the time zone, or what?
Mr. Chairman, I can't answer that question directly. I'm fairly certain the state of Alabama requires permitting throughout. I'm not entirely sure about that.
Not necessarily.
And I'm pretty sure Louisiana, when I represent suppliers in Louisiana, they do have a taxing mechanism because they don't pay sales tax on their projects. Contractors are coming with tax-free certificates, and I've run into that. I don't know anything
I
beyond that.
can't understand, other than just the pure politics of it, as someone who comes from a county who's still largely rural and on the smaller side of the counties in this state, my law firm represents the county. We've had a permitting division for years and years and years. It's not overly expensive, and it works very well in our county. And to find out that you have a county like Lamar County, with all the people that are down there and all the building and the progress that's been made down there, and even in Lauderdale, with a city the size of Meridian, I think Lauderdale County was mentioned, that doesn't have a permitting process. That's crazy to me.
And it would be, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to monopolize the conversation. You've got some great minds in here and a lot of different perspectives. But it would be easy if you had a statewide building code and
That's where I'm
statewide
going with
inspections.
this.
But you'd be able to, at that point in time, monitor several things. If, in order to get a permit, I had to have licensure, then you'd monitor licensure. I'm not going to give you a permit unless you give me your license number. If you made taxation subject to being a permit, I have to give you my MPC number to get a permit.
Exactly.
If I have GL, general liability insurance, to protect my owner, because at the end of the day, everyone sitting here, their house is their largest investment. And if it's not done right and that builder's not insured, then I just ate how many hundreds of thousands of dollars that are now on me? Make that part of licensure and permitting.
Well, that's why I made the comment earlier, is it seems that this is just as much a permitting and licensing issue as it is a tax issue. I mean, certainly, some of the tax policy could be changed, and some of it may need to be changed and be done in a better way. But if we could start from, cradle to grave and track these projects, if we had that system in place, a lot of this seems to me would fall in line.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any more questions for Sally? I don't want to leave her standing up here. There's going to be a lot of discourse.
I'm
Okay.
just shaking my head and agreeing.
Okay. If you want to, you can have a seat, and if we have any other questions or anything, you can hop back up there. Trey, one question. How long, in the instance that you just described where he is a homeowner and you're getting around having to go pull a permit, he pulls the permit in his own name because he's building it for himself, and you're basically managing the job, how long does the homeowner have a warranty on the foundation of that house?
If I am the homeowner and I've pulled the permit and I'm acting as the general contractor's result, I have a 6-year warranty. Under the statute.
Or he has a 6-year? If you're doing a construction manager, he pulls the permit.
Forgive me, Chairman.
How long does the homeowner, unsuspecting to him, how long does he have a warranty on the slab?
6 years from the date of CO.
Okay. So that's another thing to think about. In this construction management, you're basically shirking any liability or responsibility for anything that goes on in the construction of the house. You're supposed to be the so-called expert that's advising the homeowner how to build it, yet you have no liability whatsoever.
Well, I think you have liability, but you don't have insurance in place. I mean, if you're a homeowner, you're not a builder, which might as well be no liability.
Under the statute, Mr. Chairman, both of them would have liability. Okay. Under the common law, obviously, even as a construction manager, I have negligence duties, I have breach of implied warranty. But there's, under the New Home Warranty Act, the builder, in this case, who would be Mr. Allred, because he pulled the permit and he acted as his own general contractor, he has a statutory warranty, whether he knows it or not.
Yeah. But the point is a remedy. I mean, if a client comes to me and says, Trey, help me, I said, we can sue him all day long, but he's not a builder. Even though he is the builder in this situation, he's not a builder. He's not going to have the insurance in place to take care of your damages, and there's a problem.
Agreed, Mr. Chairman. And
You're spinning your wheels.
You have two problems. You have a problem in that your builder isn't a real builder. He's an owner that got, pardon the colloquial, bamboozled into being a builder. But the construction manager, who's not licensed, may or may not be insured. If the construction manager is uninsured, then that future claimant is completely left without he has a remedy, but he has no way to collect on that remedy.
Correct. And so, as I see it, I don't mind making the statement, we are doing the public a grave disservice with the policy that we currently have in place regarding licensing and permitting across the state, because just like you said, it's hard to blame these people for doing what they're doing when that's the system that we put in place. And so we have the authority to fix it. I think that's something that, at least from my standpoint, we need to look hard at this next session.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
May I?
go ahead.
This was part of the debate we had last year, Mr. Chairman, and there was some opposition to this for this very reason. Does a homeowner or the landowner have a right to build their own structure on their own property? And I think that's a worthy argument. But there are a good many counties in this state that don't have any type of building inspector or building codes. But for those that do, maybe we just baby step it and say, hey, if you've got that in place in a municipality or a county, then it's going to be enforced. And then we can have an implementation date 3 or 5 years out saying everybody must be compliant at some point. But this was part of the debate we had, and we had a healthy debate on this last year on that product.
Meg, our commissioner, to the question of having to register in order to get a building permit, what would you need in order to feel confident that you would have the information you need to monitor these folks to make sure they're not doing something that's, obviously that our local businesses are having to accommodate and account for. Is there any accountability piece in having these out-of-state companies register, or do you think that would help in your estimation, or what do y'all are looking rather strangely at my question? If you don't mind, hop up to the mic real quick so we can.
The Department of Revenue does have a registration portal, but keep in mind our focus, our job is the collection and administration of the tax laws in the state, right? So if you make these contractors register with us to obtain a tax number, there's really very little follow-through we can do if there's no expectation that they owe us any tax. And so without changing the way the tax structure is, just making them register with us doesn't ensure that there is proper taxing. Because, for example, a building contractor, or that's not even a good example, a restaurant registers with us to obtain a sales tax number. I have an expectation that every month that restaurant has to file a return and pay the tax due to us that they owe. If they do not file a return, I send them an estimated assessment. I realize they haven't filed their return, they're going to get an estimated assessment from me. Their choice at that point is to either file their actual return and pay the tax that they actually do, or they have to pay the estimated assessment, or there's collection activities that ensue for us to collect that tax. So if you have a requirement for them to register with us, we need a filing expectation that they owe tax on some recurring basis, monthly, quarterly, whatever that might be, before we have the ability to say, hey, you're not paying the tax that you owe us. If you just register with us, that's great, but that doesn't mean that you've still done everything you're supposed to do. Did I answer your question?
What if you require in order to get pull a permit on a job, typically if you pull a permit, there's probably going to be an inspection on that job. If the cities notify DOR, license or tax ID number so-and-so pulled a permit and it was inspected. I mean, that may be too much sugar for a dime. I'm just trying to think of a way that you.
Well, we talked a little bit about the out-of-state roofers primarily that come in, and I would hesitate to say in most instances, let me back up. I shouldn't even say in most, because I don't know the answer to that. They've got to have a way to get those shingles on the house that they're roofing in Mississippi. And so they're probably not bringing in truckloads of shingles with them. They're probably buying their shingles somewhere in Mississippi. So those shingles there is Mississippi tax being paid on those shingles. And in most cases, they're probably having the homeowner go buy those shingles because nope. No, please do.
Our experience is that they're not. They're getting materials from suppliers and
They're paying.
one invoice.
Okay. So then we are missing the tax on the labor piece of that. And so that does create a situation that's a problem. And so generally when we think about, if I go to the building materials of the shingle supply house or whatever, and I give them my sales tax number, then I can buy those things exempt. And so maybe there is something that we can do in relation to that purchase at the building supply, of how to enforce having them register with us if they're not already registered. Even if they're going to be paying tax on those shingles, maybe there is something that they're required to give a number regardless of whether they're paying tax on that purchase at the time of purchase.
Let me ask you this. If I have an MPC on a job and I have a contractor that sends me an invoice and I pay it and I send the MPC, and so he doesn't charge tax, when he files his monthly statement, do they list their MPCs they get on jobs and the amount of tax they didn't collect?
The subcontractor?
Yeah.
So in general, they will keep in their records the MPC number for the job that they worked on and the amount of tax that the amount of that their draw off those jobs, so that they can substantiate why they did not pay tax on that.
But do they report it to DOR? Because otherwise, I mean, it wouldn't come into question unless you did a physical audit on them. But if they file a monthly statement like, hey, I had this much revenue, but I didn't charge tax on this because I have this MPC number. I know when I pay my MPCs, I have an MPC number and I list the amount of income I got in and the amount that I'm paying remitting to the state. If a entity sells to a tax-free, sales tax exempt entity, do they list that sales tax number and how much was sold to them?
We
so
do.
You know that they have a.
Yeah. We do provide the ability for taxpayers to report their exempt sales on their sales tax return, but there is no requirement that they do that. Some do it and some don't. So without any kind of teeth where we can require them to report it that way, some do, some don't. Because I don't have a way to penalize them if they don't provide that information. And so without that kind of enforcement tool there, some do, some don't, and then we have to deal with that in the audit situation.
Okay. Lee, Bob, Tim, y'all have any kind of observations from your perspective on, or Trey, anything that you would want us to look at or consider or to think about moving forward?
What? I'm a little bit unusual in that I do commercial and residential construction. I'm licensed for commercial in the state of Mississippi, but I also do a lot of residential construction. I would say about 50-50. It is an easy process to get an MPC number with the Department of Revenue, and to provide that to your subs and to your material suppliers and not pay tax. That's a relatively easy and effective way to do it. When we brought this up at the Home Builders Association meeting back in the winter board meetings, it was most residential new construction builders do not want to change the way they're doing it. I can't get a real handle on why that is, but they don't want to change the way it's being done. The problem is that most new home construction residential builders also do remodeling work. So then you can get into, well, I did a kitchen and I built the cabinets in my shop and I took them out there. Well, you're supposed to say, charge 7% tax on that by the law. So, but they don't. They don't want to do that. So I think it needs to be cleaned up on how we're doing residential. A lot of the new construction home builders don't want to change it. But having worked both sides of it, the MPC number is simplistic and it's accurate and it's an easy way for us to do business.
I think the reason why the new home construction don't want to change it is because they don't have to do anything with it right now. They just proceed as usual. They pay sales tax when they buy their lumber. They pay sales tax when they get their air conditioning guy come out there. But they don't charge sales tax on the end product.
But if they get audited and they're doing some what they consider remodeling work and it's service work, it's going to be a totally different.
I say that with a caveat of they're doing new home construction.
Right.
When they add remodeling, they're taking in the risk of doing exactly what you just talked about. But if you have a guy or a girl that does just new home construction, I know why they don't want to touch it because they don't have to do any work.
They don't do anything.
Yeah, it's just go on about your day. Absolutely.
And 3.5% at the end of a project's a big number too. They can kind of hide the tax in, the purchase of material along the way. But if we get to the end of our contract and all of a sudden you owe me, my $30,000 builder's fee and 3.5% of $400,000, that's a bigger number.
Well, you also will have a cheaper price on your materials because you're not paying sales tax to them. So there's a 7% savings on a portion of it.
You certainly will, but that number,
yeah,
when you look at that contract, that's going to jump out.
Yeah. So
But if everybody's doing it the same way, or
right.
supposed to be doing it the same way, you're on an
it
even
levels the playing field.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love it when we have hearings on stuff that I know what I'm talking about. Or partially know what I'm talking about, at least. Look, I've been through this. I've experienced the frustration of realizing you weren't doing it correctly, and you know, it's one of those things that, for the most part, everybody's wanting to do it the right way. It's just, it's confusing on what the right way is. If you know, once you kind of get in the groove, and most home builders, I think I'll speak for them, you know, you start doing your work and going about it, it's just another job, and, you know, you don't know to look and to tell whether, oh, well, this trade is, I'm supposed to charge sales tax because 50% of my job wasn't one trade or the other. So it is confusing to a lot of people, and I think a lot of people just want to get out there and work and do the job and move on and pay whatever they're supposed to pay, as long as everybody's paying it. So it's, you know, and with the taxation issue, with what Sally had talked about with out-of-state companies coming in, I know that's a reality. I've seen it firsthand, and it's frustrating because a Mississippi business is losing an opportunity at a job, and somebody is cheating the state out of what everybody else is paying that does get the job in Mississippi with our contractors. So there's definitely a couple items to look at in the session. So, gentlemen.
Mr. Chairman, one thing, if we're looking at the licensure part of it, I feel like we need to look at different cities charge different amounts, and they actually license that contractor in that city or in that county. And if you've got a contractor that's working in multiple cities, he's having to get a permit or a license in each city. And I've had some of my contractors complain about that, like they have to get one for the city of Tupelo, they have to get one for the city of Fulton, and it could be $1,000 at each one just to work in that city. And I would feel more comfortable if we're going to require everybody to be licensed, you license them as a state, and then they get building permits. But if we go down the road of every city is licensing the contractors in that city, or every county is licensing them in the county, and then they got to have a separate license to work in the city, I just think we need to have something that's more uniform across the state. And I don't know if y'all have thought about anything like that, but if you're a contractor and you're going to work in Mississippi and you get your Mississippi license, then are you going to have to get a license for Rankin County or the city of Jackson? You know, it's just, they're going to be constantly bombarded with getting a new license, because a lot of the cities, my understanding, are requiring some contractors to have a license, and they're not recognizing the state license. They have to have a city license. So it's just, I just don't want to bombard our contractors having to be licensed in every different city.
Well, what I can comment to that.
Really?
What I think they do is they're supposed to accept a statewide license. If you have a contractor's license with the Board of Contractors, they should accept that. But you've got a lot, small towns all across the state and counties of whether they be, you know, electrical contractors or plumbers or whatever they are, they claim they don't ever do a job more than $50,000. And so they don't necessarily, may not have to be licensed. They get licensed inside, they get a license to be an electrician in the city of Fulton for whatever, you know, whatever it is. But there is no enforcement mechanism. There's no policing of whether they ever do jobs more than 50,000 or not, or more than 10, or whatever the situation may be. And so it's just it's a hodgepodge patchwork, literally all across the state. And it's had conversations with the Board of Contractors, you know, Stephanie Lee over there, and I've had this conversation many times. It's a real problem, and it affects everything from insurance to liability issues. When there's problems, who's responsible? It's just not the system can be vastly improved. I believe that.
Anybody have any comments to that are in the contracting world? Is it more of an actual physical license to operate in that city, or is it more like, you know, I know they have to get a bond in the city. Some require a bond to do work there. A license to operate in the city, kind of like a sort of a privilege license. Okay. I mean, it's the same concept, but different. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Whether, and that's if they have if they're actually licensed by the state to be a plumber or a electrical contractor or a HVAC contractor, mechanical contractor. That license should be suffice for any city.
They're licensed contractors by the state, but each city is charging them a fee to operate in their city. Some counties are charging them a fee.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we need to be careful when we look at those fees because some of those fees are being utilized to fund those permitting departments or those code enforcement officers. So that we'll need to consider that. Thank you.
All right. Well, good discussion. Are there any other comments from any of the members? Anybody? Trey, you look like you're ready to jump on the button over there. Good deal. Well, thank y'all for your time today. This was very informative, and hopefully it'll give us some ideas on what to tackle in the session. So thank y'all for your participation. This meeting's adjourned.